All right, we are back online, and it is my great pleasure to introduce David Bauders, CEO of SPARXiQ. And today we're going to have a conversation about virtual sales training, the three keys to success. Welcome, Dave.
Yeah, welcome, Gerhard. It's great to be here today.
You have a high energy level, and I like that about you.
I'm glad to be here. I think the topic we're talking about is obviously very timely. A lot of us had our world turned upside down about 6 months ago, and all of a sudden, virtual training became the only kind of training for most companies. And so I think it's a good time, 6 months out, to reflect on where we've been and think about what might come next to help us to be successful going forward.
Awesome. So, can you give us a little overview of what we're going to cover?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to get into why virtual. Obviously, a lot of us were forced into virtual. So there are some deeper questions around, well, why does virtual make sense on an ongoing basis? So we'll get into that. We'll talk about what some of the keys to success are, how to be effective at it, and how to really adapt the way that we approach our training. And one of the things that we'll do as we go through this is we'll have a couple of pop-up surveys, anonymous survey questions that people can answer if they choose to, and you'll be able to toggle in and out of the presentation as we go through the survey, and it'll show you the results as we get through that. But yeah, we're really trying to answer the question, what is the best way to do virtual training? Because 6 months ago, we were forced into changes we didn't plan for, that we were not expecting. We didn't build learning paths around it. We didn't have curricula built. All of a sudden, just like our elementary schools, colleges, everybody else sort of had to learn a lot of these things on the fly. But I think we're starting to understand now that there are some more systematic approaches that can help us to be successful. And some of the things that we think about at SPARXiQ is really, the advantages of virtual. There are some really deep advantages if it's done well. One of them is that it's asynchronous, so we don't all have to be in the same place at the same time when we do virtual training, which historically with live training, instructor-led training, there's a lot of energy exerted simply trying to coordinate schedules. In many cases, people are flying around the country, going to conference rooms, sitting down and going through day-long, 2-day-long, 3-day-long live presentations. And the beauty of virtual training, when it's done well, is that it can be done asynchronously. People can do it at their own pace, on demand. You can have different people progressing, weaving it into the course of daily workflow. And as we're all learning, there are also some major cost efficiencies that come from virtual. And the other thing that really stands out to me with virtual is that it can be standardized and scalable. So much of the training historically has been fairly random and unstandardized. And so you sort of had a bell curve of quality, a bell curve of participation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the positive things about virtual training is that it can be standardized and become more scalable.
And you can deliver higher quality as well.
Yeah, I think that's really the rub, is that if you can deliver higher quality, then you can start to make some progress here. These advantages are important, but there's also some challenges to doing this well. And I think that's really, we start to get into some of the bigger questions here. What do companies get wrong about it with all these advantages? What's not working? And I think obviously when you have this crash course that we went through with COVID, because it was unplanned and it was sudden, there was frankly a lack of organizational buy-in and accountability. So people were switching paths midstream. They were canceling live training. They were canceling lots of instructor-led events. And all of a sudden, they either had to figure out how to do this through platforms like Zoom or other virtual platforms, or they had to get people to do e-learning. There's a variety of other techniques, but fundamentally there wasn't good planning for this. And usually what we see when there's not a lot of good planning around it is you have this kind of check the box mindset. So yes, our people showed up for the training. Yes, they completed the training. The LMS says they completed the training, therefore mission accomplished. But as we know, a lot of the content, we learned this from our primary and secondary and university educational systems. When people tried to make that sudden jump over to virtual training, they discovered that the content wasn't really designed for that. And a lot of things fell apart and just wasn't working right. So there's a bunch of challenges that have to be overcome if companies want to realize the benefits and the potential of virtual. So I think we can all acknowledge at a minimum that virtual isn't going anywhere, just like so many of the new habits that we're learning during COVID. A lot of these habits aren't going away. And I think virtual is here to stay. We are going to have more and more of our behavioral changes that we adopt during the 6-month period so far, and who knows how many more months to go. We're learning new habits and we're mastering new ways of doing things. And so I think virtual is, when it comes to training, the advantages are so compelling in terms of cost, in terms of scalability, all the things that we talked about, that the big question is how to get it right. And that's really, I think, what hopefully everyone here is wondering, how do we do that thing? What is the secret to getting it right? Gerhard, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that you said it right. You mentioned that COVID was really a crash course for doing things better and doing things virtually. But I think that when you look at the path of digital transformation that has taken place in so many organizations, there was still a lot of quiet resistance. Salesforce.com is now, 20 years old? And the thing that was stuck out from the very beginning was user adoption, because people had a fear of leaving the information with the company that was personal before. So I think that fear is the biggest inhibitor for doing things right. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of inertia, and whether it's caused by fear or caused by laziness or caused by just not having the bandwidth to focus on it, there's a lot of reasons why people haven't adopted. And I think, even today, I must sit through, as I'm sure everybody attending sits through, dozens of virtual meetings per week. These platforms are being adopted, but they're not being adopted well consistently. And frankly, we still see lots of people who haven't even figured out how to do an effective Zoom meeting. And so I think these technological shifts, the paradigm shifts that we're talking about, are going to require a lot of people to really focus in on them and find new ways of doing things if they're going to be successful. So one of the things that we think is really important when it comes to virtual training, in the old days, we had people show up at conference rooms, we lit up the projector, we fired up the PowerPoints, and we had people doing what I call death by PowerPoint, which was, one of the great banes of live training. And I think one of the things that virtual is pushing us to reconsider is, what are the things that we should be training on? Because everybody knows, most human beings, most of us can't really stand going through 2-3 days of 8 hours of Zoom-based training or virtual training, where it's just somebody talking into a computer. I mean, it's almost a violation of the Geneva Convention to ask somebody to do that. So the question is, what training is actually worthy of making this crossing of the chasm into the future? And I think that's really one of the critical questions. And a lot of companies, I think, haven't really spent enough time thinking about which training, if adopted, if mastered, will predictably produce an ROI. And do they have a clear path from the training that they're doing to an economic return on investment? So I think one of the big questions is, how do you know what training to choose? And are you using competency assessments? Do you have clear criteria for what competencies or capabilities your sellers need in order to be successful? And is the training providing the right amount of that? One of the hallmarks of great training is it's just enough, it's just for me, and it's just in time. And it's not just in case training. And frankly, a lot of training in the past has been just in case you need this, we're going to have you sit through a day or 2 days or 3 days of PowerPoints. And so I think it's really forcing a rationalization of what people focus on, and really pushing hard on the question of what is the real ROI that comes from taking people out of productive workflow and focusing on learning new skills. Your thoughts, Gerhard?
Well, I just remember that you said something in the beginning about doing a quick poll of the audience. Is that still something you want to do?
I think it'll come up automatically as we go through. I'm not
Oh,
sure if the
okay.
technology is working, but
Okay.
there may be a
Yeah,
poll that comes up, and I think it'll ask some of the questions about what
got
kinds
it.
of
Got it.
virtual training people do.
So back to choosing your topics carefully. I think it's so you're so right on that a lot of people embark on a journey without a roadmap. How does that gap look like in my sales organization? So if you are used to doing assessments, I think you're gonna identify the gaps very, very quickly, and you can explain to everybody and justify to everybody uh, what they need to learn, what is not nice to have, but what people must have, the skills that you need to succeed, especially in that economy right now. As you say, that we are 6 months in, we're probably due for another 6 months of the same. And if you have not already adjusted your training, I think that it's high time that you made the shift.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing with best practices here is really companies that are forming kind of 3 levels of training. They have macro training, which is new to everybody in the organization. Everybody needs it. If it's mastered, it will produce results. Then there's kind of clusters of people who may have common needs, and competency assessments can help us to identify what are those groupings of people who maybe need help with qualification skills or maybe need help with presentation skills. So finding clusters. And then at the most granular level, it's what is the personalized learning path for each individual. And that's really where the data can help us to understand what I call algorithmic learning, which is what are the data telling us that this individual needs to master to realize their full potential. So one of the things I think in trying to answer the question, what is worthy of training, is figuring out what event, what type of activity and daily workflow would you do differently after you consume this training, and then try to pull those 2 together so that they're no longer disparate. Like our company, for example, offers a course in negotiation training. One of the best things you can do with negotiation training is to basically tee up an event after the negotiation training that says, hey, I'm going to review all of the contracts that my sales force has coming up for renewal. Now that they have a better lens of understanding leverage and the tactics of negotiation, I want them to deliver X dollars more revenue or X dollars more price through their review of those contracts. If you can form that type of a linkage between the training that you're doing and the behaviors that you want or the events that you want to see happen, that's how you ensure that you're getting ROI. You have to be able to connect it to something real that's going to happen, ideally in close proximity to when the training's been consumed.
Excellent. Why don't we pause for a second and launch the poll now?
Okay, sure.
So is the question, we did mostly live training and have transitioned much of it to virtual. The answer is 78%.
So most companies have actually made the transition. They are doing mostly virtual, and now they're probably trying to answer the question, how do we do it well? Which training is worthy of it? And I'm sure there's a lot of the sorting through that companies are going through, trying to figure out how can we improve it? How do we sharpen what we ask of our learners and make sure we're on point? You think beyond, choosing content that matters is making the content compelling. And this is really where we as consumers have been spoiled in our personal lives, because people are serving up fresh content all the time, whether it's sports on TV or it's favorite Netflix series. It may be all the great streaming shows that are coming out, movies. We're frankly saturated with immersive experiences in our consumer worlds, and yet our business worlds, our professional worlds, remain stuck with green screen video, voice over PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint. And frankly, I think a lot of people just haven't put enough energy into making the content compelling. And I think that's what leads to fatigue. There have actually been studies done that show that when people are exposed to really dull video, basically the single camera green screen type of video, their brains are so hardwired from their consumer experience, their personal experience, that their brains tune out when they see the single frame green screen video. And I think that's one of the things that it's really raising the question when we create virtual content, how do we make sure that it grabs people's attention? One of the things that we like to talk about is binge-worthy training. So if you want to have binge-worthy training, you have to really focus on what is the user experience. It's not just about the content itself. It's how do you actually get that content transformed into something that is compelling. And what we mean by that is that the student will naturally consume it faster than we ask them to. If we see that behavior going on, we know that we have compelling content.
And we're going to launch another quick poll where we ask which format is most used. So we are going to launch this now. Which format do you use the most for virtual sales training? And we give it about a minute to get everybody thinking about the answers. And then I will share the results. So when you said earlier that you have a negotiation training, when you think about all the sales training that is out there, do you feel that negotiation training is more for advanced salespeople?
Well, in any business, there's two big questions. One is how do you create value, and the other is how do you capture value. So most of the training that salespeople take is focused on the first part of that statement. How do I create value for the modern buyer? And that's fantastic. It's really important. Without creating value, there's nothing to capture. But what we see over and over again with sales reps is that they are not as effective at capturing the value they create for customers, bringing it back to their stakeholders. And so an effective negotiation training program for anybody who has negotiated pricing, negotiated terms and conditions, all of these different factors that collectively drive the lifeblood of a company. If you haven't been trained in how to negotiate effectively, you're creating value, but you're not capturing it. And that's not sustainable for most companies today. If they can't capture the value they create, they're not going to grow. And one of the statistics that we know is that over 90% of professional buyers are trained in the art of negotiation, but often fewer than 10% of sellers have been consistently, systematically trained in the art, the science, the techniques of professional negotiation. So you can imagine there's a lot of value that gets uncaptured when you have that kind of a dynamic.
So the answers are in when you look at real-time instructor-led virtual session, Zoom, etc. It's 67%, about 2/3 of the audience. And 5% use narrated slide recordings, 10% interactive e-learning, and nobody uses pre-recorded produced video.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's coming, and I think it's going to take some new approaches and new investments in order to be successful. And really the third key to success that we see with virtual training, as I said with my example around negotiation, is how do you support and reinforce it? And a lot of companies really haven't thought through how do they engage their organizations? What's the role of managers engaging early, going through the training, mastering the training, and then being able to reinforce after sales reps have gone through it, make sure that there's a follow-up or feedback loop that reinforces it. So without that type of a feedback loop, a lot of times the training just dies. We all know the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Within 30 days, our feeble human brains will forget 90% of what we've learned without retention activities. So we always say if it's worth learning, it's worth retaining. And if you don't have a strategy for retention, you should stop calling it training and just call it pre-forgetting, because it's at the stage where it's going to be forgotten 30 days from now. And I think that's really where virtual training potentially offers big benefits for companies, because designed well, it can't just be replay the training over and over and over again. Nobody has the patience for that. The big question is, how do we start to drip train? And instead of drink from a fire hose, how do we provide small drips that help to embed that knowledge for long periods of time? But I think the organizational issue is equally important. How do we get managers to go first? How do they get them to lead the adoption of training? We all know how important coaching is. Frankly, if you're a manager, you can't coach something until you've mastered it yourself. And so that's a big part of success here as well. So I'd say it's really organizational, and then it's adopting the micro learning, the drip learning approach, and not going for the fire hose approach, which, as we all know, doesn't work. And I guess the third piece is really of this idea is integrating it into daily workflow. So just-in-time learning, small micro lessons that can be learned right before a particular sales activity, whether it's prospecting, discovery, presentation, proposals, things like that. Having short micro lessons that can be injected directly through CRM or other tools into workflow can really help to connect the learnings with the behavioral change that we're looking for.
Dave, what do you think about gamification of learning?
I think gamification is an interesting idea. I think it's one of those things that, getting badges, getting certificates, getting points. I think it can work for a little while, but I think at the end of the day, it has a useful life. And gamification, I think it frankly has been a little bit overhyped. I think good content that people find valuable in their jobs, find compelling in its format, that's delivered in the right amounts at the right time, is a better answer than trying to give people points and badges and things like that. I do think certifications are valuable, but certification and gamification are very different ideas.
I just want to give you a heads up. We're about 5 minutes to the end of the session.
Sure. So if we were to, summarize what is the key here, again, it's really being disciplined about which domains are worthy of virtual training. If we make smart decisions about what we train in, we're going to get a much better chance of having full adoption, and we're going to get better ROI by design rather than by chance. I think paying special attention to the content has become important. We're all familiar with the fatigue that goes on from meeting after meeting after meeting, all being conducted in Zoom. So finding new ways of having experiential learning, finding new, more immersive approaches. Our company happens to specialize in producing Hollywood-based video. Giving people an experience they look forward to rather than one they dread, I think is going to be important going forward. And then really the idea of having a system, whether it's the managers or the integration into workflow, that helps to embed those skills and to coach them to mastery and to apply them and continuously drive the behavioral change that we're looking for. We do have a few resources for companies that are interested in learning more about this that can help you to really understand where some of the best practices are. We have 3 free ebooks for folks who are attending the conference on sales training systems, sales coaching excellence, and sales hiring systems. These are all some of the, I think, some of the key building blocks that can help companies to do it more effectively. And for those of you who may be interested in how is Hollywood starting to impact training, this is, I think, one of the more exciting developments. You can go to our website at SPARXiQ.com for training. We have kind of an unusual approach. We start with subject matter experts, and then we say, well, we're just getting started. We actually push it through and say, hey, let's see what Hollywood can do with some of these things. So we go through all of the scripting, the casting, all of the dramatic and comedic processes of Hollywood to try to bring people an experience that makes them want to learn more. And so that's our particular take on it. We certainly hope that companies will make this pivot. Obviously, human capital is the foundation of every business. Human capital only moves forward when people learn new things and apply them in their jobs. So I think it's a big mission for everybody here today.
Well, I remember speaking to your team that is sort of in front of the camera, that professional actors that portray buyers and sellers. And I've seen many, many, many videos before that were scripted. But what is so amazing is that your actors are so smooth that everybody wants to hire those people because they are so eloquent and so real. And the term binge-worthy is really very appropriate. I think that your videos are short enough to maintain the interest and want to know more.
Yeah, I think, we're proud of the videos that we've made, the courses that we've produced. They have the predictable characteristic of generating ROI. We only produce content if, when consumed and mastered, it will move the economic needle. So we've done, I think, a pretty good job of figuring out what's worthy of Hollywood, and then really driving it through a very difficult process to get it to the point where people actually find it binge-worthy. And then at the end of the day, I think the other thing that we've done that we're pretty conscious of in these times is making it socially relevant. And we've really focused on having content that reflects the times that we live in, that provides an aspirational view of how sales teams can work together. And we hope that it's uplifting for people as much as it is engaging. So we're happy to provide that, and maybe it'll play a role in the virtual training journey of some of the companies here today.
So when people go to SPARXiQ.com/training, they can sample some of those videos.
That's right. Yeah, we'd be happy to have folks visit if they want to reach out and have a conversation. It's easy to do that, and hopefully you'll add a little bit of binge-worthy to your training plan. So,
yeah, and I suggest that anybody who is interested in learning more, we have a 10-minute break. Head over to the SPARXiQ booth, and you can chat with the sales team, or maybe have a one-on-one meeting with Dave Bauders.
Okay, well, thank you, Gerhard. Great to be here today, and all the best to all the folks attending, and we look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Take care.
Bye-bye.